Hey, I'm Ches and welcome to the Out Loud channel. In this video I'm going to talk about a recently published article by the AJ magazine on poor working conditions, and then I'm going to share some thoughts about the current toxic state of the architecture and design industry. Also, I want to give some suggestions about what people can do, about their pay, overtime, and really about people's rights. But first, a tiny bit of context about me. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a landscape architect. Years ago, I've moved from Italy. I studied in the UK, and today my day-to-day job is that of delivering and designing landscape architecture projects in the UK and abroad. So this is my humble perspective, and I really just want to share it with you. With that said, today's topic really relates to an everlasting issue.
Issues?
Issues. Let's list them out. Underpayment, bullying, false promises, micromanagement, overtime, incompetence, racial discrimination, working overtime, poor working conditions really. I could keep going on all day. The argument here is not new, but it has recently caught my attention and the attention of people around me, especially when a few weeks ago the AJ magazine published an article where they revealed interviewing some architectural assistants that really broke silence about their poor working conditions in practice. So first of all, did you know that 48% of Part 1 architectural assistants and 15% of Part 2 architectural assistants are currently paid under the real living wage? I mean, this is fucking appalling. So it's been over a year since the COVID pandemic has begun in the early 2020, and it has been a very interesting development, especially for how architectural practices have had to adapt to changing economies, changing markets. We've seen people being furloughed, we've seen people let go, we've seen people fired, we've seen people being furloughed and still asked to work while being on furlough. We've seen people coming back, we've seen other people leaving. Luckily, I was kept on, and I still am.
Although I did have second thoughts about maybe taking that 20% cut and enjoy a little bit of free time, maybe dedicate some of this time to things that make me more passionate and make me more rewarding.
But many others have not been so lucky. So the AJ article written by Ella Jessel explains the appalling situation of poor pay, precarious contracts, and COVID rule breaking. And by the way, if you have read this article, what do you think about it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. So for example, a young architectural assistant discussed in the article was in her first job at a big London practice when the UK's first lockdown hit 1 year ago. So she worked 90 hours a week from home, receiving requests for drawings during the night. Then when the project finished, she was basically put on furlough. This is appalling. I can't stand this, but realistically, that's the position and the situation that many professionals find themselves in today. I mean, I too have been in a situation where at the beginning of my career, when I was pretty much the equivalent to a Part 1 architectural assistant, I was basically paid peanuts. I was on the 18 or 19k range. So I was also struggling every month, and I basically had to take side jobs, do a bit of freelance work. But things have definitely improved for me, but they haven't for everyone, especially the architectural assistant discussed in the AJ article. So the practice then offered her a 0 hours contract, which she took, obviously, as she needed some form of minimum income. So you might be wondering, what is a 0 hour contract? So a 0 hour contract is a term used to describe a type of employment contract between an employer and an employee whereby the employer is not obliged to provide any minimum number of working hours to an employee. The term 0 hour contract is primarily used in the United Kingdom, and really 0 hour contracts in the UK are very controversial. They're simply a mean to exploitation. Basically, the current state of the industry seems a bit terrible, and the future of practitioners like me is very unstable. This is why I've turned to investing, cryptocurrencies, freelance jobs, just things on the side. But more on this for another video. So this unstable situation has made many people upset, raised national concerns, and one example of this, of people standing up to highlight this issue, is FAF, Future Architects Front. Basically, FAF is a group of young professionals who I really recommend following on social medias. Basically, they publish an open letter where they attack the profession's failures, and this letter has raised people's attention, and many others like them have also attack the profession. So there are a few things you can do to address the issues we just talked about. As architects and architectural assistants, you have rights. Basic employment rights. And basically the first thing to do, truly I recommend it, is to know your rights. This is basically right of salary, overtime, and really the terms of your employment. So the first one could be about pay. For example, if you think that you're not being paid enough, then you need to work it out. You need to calculate what you think you should be paid. The national minimum wage by law is £8.20 per hour for under 25, which makes up to over £17,000 a year, and it's of £8.72 per hour for people over 25 years old, which rounds up to over 18k per year. RIBA practices, however, they have been made to pay all staff the real living wage, which is £9.50 per hour in the UK and £10.85 for London workers. This should make up for almost 20k per year in the UK and 22.5k per year in London. And one thing to notice is this wage must be paid for all working hours. That includes overtime too. So if overtime is what you're doing, then you need to step up and challenge your employer about it. It's in your rights and you should not be afraid of speaking up. Also, claims can be made to the employment tribunal or the civil court. Otherwise, if you're not being paid the real living wage, then you need to report your practice to the RIBA. The best solution though is to organize yourself with your colleagues, people you work with, and work together with a group claim against your employer. So when it comes to overtime, instead, if you think that you're working far too many hours, then again, the solution is very similar. You need to talk to your pals, you need to talk to your colleagues. And if you all feel very similarly, again, you need to discuss it with your employer first. And it's your right to make demands to your employer for more decent treatment. The terms of your employment also are very important too. They state what you can do and cannot do during your working contract. For example, recently I've been working outside my organization with ex-university colleagues. We've been working on competitions, small private projects. Basically, I had to go back and look at my contract to see if I could do this. As in most cases, it is allowed, as long as you're not directly competing to your employer with the work you do in the practice you work. Then in that case, you're fine. So if that's the case, you're fine to work on side projects. But it's always very useful to talk to them first. However, some firms actually ask for complete exclusivity, meaning you pretty much can't do anything aside from working for them. And carefully, sometimes in the clauses are phrased in a way that they actually make it sound like you can't do anything outside work. Let's say you're an illustrator, you like doing drawings, and you want to sell your graphics online. Technically, some contracts really challenge this and impede you from doing this. Of course, lots of people don't really care about this, but just know this. In that case, you are in breach of contract. Now, before you sign a contract, you need to read all the clauses and don't just skim through. Read them properly, because it's in your rights to actually say that you don't like some of the clauses and you want them changed. Again, if there are things that you don't agree with, you need to tell your employer and challenge him for this. Maybe you want your employer to amend the contract based on your demands, and you shouldn't be afraid of it. People tend to just ignore some of these aspects of a contract, which at the beginning seem very futile, but actually in the long run, you might realize that if you would have changed that clause at the very beginning, it would have been beneficial in the future. It is a bit different when you're working as a freelancer. In fact, there is no statutory requirement for you to have a written contract. But nonetheless, you should try to have one written down, because that will state what your pay rate is and any other thing that you'd like to be contractually bound. Another topic is COVID issues. If you're being required to come into the office, well, you can definitely refuse to do this. If you reasonably believe that you'd be at risk of danger, then you're entitled to refuse to go to the office. And today that could mean going into the underground tube station in a busy London, or getting up on a busy double-decker bus. Employees are legally entitled to stay at home, and so if you're concerned about your health and safety on your commute to work, then don't worry, the legislation protects you. Section 44 of the Employment Rights Act states that employees have the right not to suffer a detriment or be dismissed for refusing to work in such circumstances. So don't be scared of refusing if you're really not feeling that comfortable. So we've touched on furlough and furlough scheme. By now, a year through the pandemic, You'll probably be aware of what the furlough scheme is. So in the scenario in which you're actually on furlough and you're being still asked to work, then you should seriously talk to your manager or your director and submit an internal grievance. This should hopefully put your director into some form of basic pressure, which will hopefully bring them to their senses. But if nothing changes, really, the only solution is to report them to HMRC and the RIBA. So while this sounds really nice and easy, you should just be aware that doing this, you could be in a slightly vulnerable position in which you're pretty much whistleblowing. However, by speaking out loud to your employer, you're basically using employment law, and therefore you're protected by it. You would basically be locked under law protection. Essentially, you're still protected by whistleblowing legislation, even if your employer is an actual dickhead. You must be wondering, what has this landscape architect got to do with anything? Well, being in the same industry, we share a lot of these issues, frustrations, and perhaps this video is just my way to reach out to all landscape architects and any other creative practitioner that feels the same way. So what do you think about this? Are you one of those people who are actually super frustrated and have had enough of this situation, this industry failure? Or are you completely on the opposite side where you found your ideal practice and you have absolutely nothing to complain about? So thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, leave your comments below and let me know your thoughts. And if you have any ideas for future videos, let me know what you'd like to explore. I'll be reading all your comments.